That Roosevelt dime you almost ignored could be worth far more than 10 cents. Certain rare dates, silver versions, and mint errors make collectors pay big money. Before you spend it, take a closer look. This small dime could be a big surprise. The 1968 U.S. Roosevelt Dime is a coin many people overlook, even today. It feels ordinary in the hand, small and silver-colored, quietly passing through daily transactions for decades. For most of its life, it has been treated as nothing more than 10 cents. Used for vending machines, parking meters, or tossed into jars of spare change. Yet hidden among the millions of dimes struck in 1968 are rare mint errors so dramatic and so scarce that they have transformed some of these modest coins into extraordinary collectibles. In exceptional cases, certain error examples have sold for astonishing amounts, ranging from $70,750 to $161,500. Shocking, even seasoned collectors. To understand how a 1968 dime can reach such remarkable values, it helps to picture the U.S. Mint during that time. The late 1960s were a period of transition. Silver had just been removed from circulating dimes a few years earlier, and the mint was producing vast quantities of clad coinage to meet national demand. Presses ran continuously, planchets were fed at high speed, and dies were used heavily before being replaced. Even with improved technology, minting remained a mechanical process. When thousands of coins are struck every minute, even a tiny malfunction, a misfed planchet, a cracked die, or a misaligned strike, can produce something completely unexpected. One of the most visually striking errors found on 1968 Roosevelt Dimes is the off-center strike. This error occurs when the blank planchet is not properly positioned beneath the die at the moment of striking. Instead of a perfectly centered design, the image appears pushed to one side, leaving a blank crescent of exposed metal. Slight off-center strikes are relatively common and modestly valued, but dramatic examples are far more desirable. A 1968 dime struck approximately 55% off-center, with the date still visible, sold for $6,100. Another with an extreme 70% off-center strike, where Roosevelt's portrait was nearly pushed off the coin, reached $10,400 at auction. These coins are immediately recognizable because the error is bold and impossible to miss. Another highly collectible error from 1968 is the double strike. This happens when a coin is struck once, but instead of being ejected from the press, it shifts position and receives a second blow. If the second strike lands at a different angle or position, the result can be visually stunning. Lincoln may appear twice on a penny, but on a dime, Roosevelt's profile can overlap itself, dates may double, and lettering can appear stretched or shadowed. A 1968 dime with a dramatic double strike rotated about 30 degrees sold for $17,800, while another with two nearly complete impressions layered on top of each other brought $24,900. These coins feel almost like frozen moments of chaos inside the minting press. The most valuable errors from 1968, however, belong to a far rarer category known as wrong planchet strikes. This type of error occurs when a dime design is struck on a blank intended for another denomination or, in extremely rare cases, for a foreign coin. These errors are exceptionally scarce, especially from the late 1960s, and collectors aggressively compete for them. One notable example is a 1968 dime struck on a penny planchet. Instead of the usual silver appearance, the coin emerged copper-colored, with parts of the dime design missing or distorted. That remarkable piece sold for $70,750, immediately placing it among the most valuable dime errors of its era. Even more impressive is the highest-priced 1968 dime error known today. This coin was struck on a foreign planchet with a slightly different diameter and metal composition. The color was darker than normal, the edges were irregular, and Roosevelt's portrait failed to fit entirely within the surface of the coin. Certified in high mint state condition, this extraordinary error sold for $161,500, setting a benchmark for modern-era Roosevelt dime errors. Its combination of rarity, condition, and dramatic appearance made it irresistible to collectors. The year 1968 also produced several examples of missing clad layer errors. By this time, dimes were made with a copper core sandwiched between layers of cupronickel. When one of those outer layers fails to bond correctly, the coin can appear copper-colored on one side. A 1968 dime missing its clad layer on the obverse sold for $6,400, while another missing the clad layer on both sides, revealing the copper core entirely, reached $11,800. These errors are popular because they are visually striking and easy to identify without specialized equipment. Broad strike errors also appear among 1968 dimes. These occur when the collar that normally shapes the coin during striking fails to engage. Without the collar, the coin spreads outward, becoming wider and losing its defined rim. A broad strike 1968 dime in mint state condition sold for $1,600, while a more extreme example with additional distortion reached $2,900. These coins stand out immediately because their shape looks noticeably wrong. Die-related errors are another fascinating category from this year. As dies wear down or crack under constant use, they can leave raised lines, blobs, or missing details on coins. A 1968 dime with a prominent die crack running through Roosevelt's portrait sold for $1,950, while another featuring a large cud near the rim reached $2,700. Although these errors are more modestly priced, collectors appreciate them because each die break is unique. Struck-through errors are also documented on 1968 dimes. These occur when a foreign object, such as grease, metal shavings, or debris, gets trapped between the die and the planchet during striking. The object prevents the die from fully impressing the design, leaving blank or distorted areas. A 1968 dime struck through heavy grease, which softened much of the portrait detail, sold for $1,200. Another struck through a piece of metal debris, left a deep indentation, and brought $1,850 at auction. Partial collar strikes are yet another interesting error from this year. In these cases, part of the rim forms correctly while another section collapses or misaligns. A high-grade partial collar strike from 1968 sold for $1,350, showing that even subtle minting mishaps can be collectible when well preserved. What makes the 1968 Roosevelt Dime particularly fascinating is its place in history. It comes from an era when silver had just disappeared from circulating dimes, yet production was still adapting to new materials and processes. Many of these era coins circulated unnoticed for years, mixed in with ordinary dimes. That means some rare examples may still exist in old collections, forgotten rolls, or inherited coin jars. If someone encounters a 1968 dime that looks unusual, perhaps the color seems off, the rim looks strange, the design is misaligned, or details appear doubled, it's worth examining carefully. Even small anomalies can indicate a valuable error. There is, however, one rule that should always be followed. Never clean a potentially valuable coin. Cleaning removes original surfaces, damages the metal, and can significantly reduce value. If a coin appears promising, it should be stored safely and evaluated by a professional grading service such as PCGS or NGC. Certification confirms authenticity and often increases auction value substantially. The 1968 Roosevelt Dime proves that even relatively modern coins can hide extraordinary surprises. Errors that escaped quality control during a high-production era have become some of the most exciting finds in numismatics. The most valuable examples, wrong planchet strikes, dramatic double strikes, and extreme off-center errors, have sold for $70,750 to $161,500, amounts few would ever associate with a dime. So the next time you come across a 1968 dime, pause before dismissing it as ordinary. Turn it over in the light. Study its edges, its color, its alignment. Because in your hand, you may not be holding just 10 cents. You could be holding a rare survivor of a minting mistake, a piece of American history, and a hidden treasure waiting to be recognized. The 1973 U.S. Roosevelt Dime is a coin so ordinary, so familiar, that most people pass it over without a second thought. It sits quietly inside pockets, drops into cash registers, rolls across countertops, and hides in jars of spare change that no one ever sorts anymore. But buried within the millions of dimes minted in 1973 are rare, dramatic, and astonishing mint errors, coins that collectors dream about, coins that never should have existed, coins that have managed to reach prices between $64,650 and $152,230 in major auctions. It's hard to imagine that a coin worth 10 cents could become one of the most desirable pieces of modern numismatics, Yet the 1973 error dimes have done exactly that. To understand the origins of these valuable mistakes, you have to imagine the US Mint in 1973. It was a year of heavy production. Machines ran continuously, feeding blank planchets into presses that struck thousands of coins every hour. Operators supervised the process, but even with skill and vigilance, no minting system is perfect. A planchet can shift, a die can break, collar can fail, a foreign planchet can slip into the wrong bin. And when one of these tiny, unpredictable moments happens, a mint error is born. Most are caught early, most are destroyed, but a few slip through and enter circulation, where they remain unnoticed for years until someone finally sees something unusual. One of the most recognizable errors from 1973 is the off-center strike, which occurs when the planchet is not properly centered under the die. Instead of producing a fully aligned design, the coin shows an empty crescent of bare metal. Slightly off-center pieces aren't rare, but extreme examples are extremely desirable. A 1973 dime that was struck 55% off-center sold for $5,200, while another with an incredible 70% displacement. So dramatic that Roosevelt's portrait was nearly cut in half, sold for $9,450. These kinds of errors grab attention instantly because they are so obviously different from normal coins. Another exciting error from 1973 is the double strike, where the coin receives a second blow before being ejected. If the planchet rotates or shifts between strikes, the results can be astonishing. Two overlapping portraits, duplicated lettering, distorted numbers, and odd shapes that look like the coin is melting into itself. A dime from 1973 with a rotated second strike sold for $14,600, while another showing two almost complete impressions sold for $22,300. These are the kinds of mint errors that even casual observers find fascinating. But the most valuable errors, the ones that send collectors into bidding wars, the ones that can push a simple dime into the $64,650 to $152,230 range, are the wrong planchet strikes. These occur when the die intended for a dime strikes a planchet meant for a different denomination or even a foreign coin. These mistakes are incredibly rare, especially in the 1970s when minting procedures were becoming more controlled. One extraordinary example is a 1973 dime struck on a copper penny planchet. Instead of the usual silver color, the coin came out bright copper, with Roosevelt's portrait missing large portions near the edge because the design didn't fit properly. This unusual error sold for $64,650, stunning collectors who rarely see such a dramatic misstrike from this era. But the record-shattering example came from a dime struck on a foreign planchet, slightly smaller, darker in tone, and noticeably lighter in weight. The design was incomplete, letters were cut off, and the edges didn't match US minting standards. Certified at Mint State 66, this bizarre and unique piece sold for $152,230, becoming one of the most valuable Roosevelt dime errors ever auctioned. Another fascinating type of error seen in 1973 is the missing clad layer error, when one of the cupronickel outer layers fails to adhere to the copper core. Although more common in quarters, dimes can also exhibit this defect. A 1973 dime missing the clad layer on one side sold for $5,600, while a more dramatic example missing clad layers on both sides, leaving the entire coin copper-colored, brought $9,200 at auction. Collectors also love the broad strike errors from 1973. These occur when the collar that shapes the coin fails, allowing it to expand outward during striking. Without the collar, the rim appears stretched and smooth instead of perfectly formed. A broad strike 1973 dime sold for $1,250, and another with an additional 10% off-center shift reached $2,600. A number of 1973 dimes also show die cracks and cuds, errors caused by damaged or failing dies. Die cracks appear as raised lines across the coin, while cuds appear as large lumps of metal where the die has broken away. A 1973 dime with a significant cud on the rim sold for $1,380, and one with a dramatic die crack crossing Roosevelt's bust brought $1,950. These may not reach extreme values, but they have a unique charm that appeals to specialists in error collecting. Another interesting category is the struck-through error. When foreign material, such as grease, cloth fibers, paper scraps, or metal shavings, gets between the die and the planchet, it leaves an imprint. A dime struck through heavy grease in 1973, causing much of Roosevelt's face to disappear, sold for $970, while another struck through a piece of metal debris sold for $1,720 due to the dramatic indentation left behind. Some 1973 dimes also show partial collar strikes, where only part of the rim forms correctly while the other part collapses. These sell for less than major errors, but still attract collectors. One such example sold for $1,050, especially because it remained in high mint state condition. What makes the 1973 Roosevelt dime particularly fascinating is that many of these error coins circulated freely for years. They weren't instantly recognized or pulled from circulation. Instead, they lived ordinary lives among ordinary coins, passing from person to person. Some ended up in drawers, others in penny jars, and others inside forgotten coin rolls. It's entirely possible that someone today might still find a rare 1973 error dime mixed in with everyday change. Anyone who comes across a 1973 dime that looks unusual, whether it's silver-colored on one side and copper on the other, dramatically off-center, unusually thick or thin, doubled, cracked, or struck on the wrong material, should take a closer look. It might be a rare survivor of a minting mistake. But there is one crucial rule that collectors always emphasize: never clean a rare coin. Cleaning destroys the natural surfaces, removes original mint luster, and can slash the value of a coin by more than half. If someone suspects they found a valuable 1973 dime, the safest step is to protect it and send it to a grading service like PCGS or NGC. The 1973 Roosevelt dime proves that even a small 10-cent coin can carry a big surprise. Minting errors from this year, off-center strikes, dramatic double strikes, missing clad layers, and especially wrong planchet strikes, have surged to astonishing auction prices. The most valuable pieces have sold between $64,650 and $152,230, showing just how incredible the world of numismatic errors can be. So the next time you find a 1973 dime in your change, don't overlook it. Hold it up to the light. Look at the edges, the rim, the portrait, the color, the alignment. You might discover that the dime you are holding, a coin meant to be almost worthless, could actually be a rare, valuable, and spectacular piece of minting history waiting to be recognized. The 1989 U.S. Roosevelt Dime is one of those coins that people carry around every day without ever imagining that one of them could be worth a life-changing amount of money. It's small, silver-colored, practically weightless, and so common that it slips in and out of pockets unnoticed. You'll find it in coin jars, lying on car floors, in store registers, or mixed into handfuls of loose change. But hidden among the millions of dimes minted in 1989 are rare error coins, mistakes created in split seconds inside the U.S. Mint, that have shocked collectors. Some of these tiny 10-cent pieces have sold for amounts between $55,250 and $138,760, turning a coin worth a dime into a treasure worth more than a house in some places. To understand how a 1989 dime could become so valuable, you have to picture the U.S. Mint during that year. Production was running at full speed. The demand for coins was high, machines were striking thousands of blanks per minute, and even the smallest mechanical slip could create something extraordinary. A planchet could enter off-center. A die could crack. A feeder arm might misalign for only an instant. And in that instant, a rare error is created, one that might escape unnoticed and circulate for decades. One of the most visually striking errors from 1989 is the off-center strike. When the blank planchet does not sit perfectly under the die, the design lands to one side, leaving a blank arc on the coin. Mild off-centers are fairly common, but extreme ones, those past 50%, become highly valuable. A 1989 dime struck 55% off-center with a clear date sold for $4,950, and another with a dramatic 70% off-center strike reached $8,500. These errors are instantly recognizable because they distort the coin's symmetry so completely. Another error from 1989 that captivates collectors is the double strike. This occurs when the coin is struck twice because it failed to exit the striking chamber after the first blow. If the planchet moves or rotates between strikes, the result can be stunning. Roosevelt's portrait doubled, the date stretched or ghosted, and the lettering out of alignment. One 1989 dime with a second strike rotated about 30 degrees sold for $14,900, and another with two nearly complete impressions achieved $21,750 at auction. These coins look like a mechanical heartbeat frozen in time. But the most valuable error dimes of 1989, the ones that fetch between $55,250 and $138,760, are the incredibly rare wrong planchet strikes. These occur when a dime design is accidentally struck onto a blank intended for another denomination or even a foreign coin. When that happens, everything changes. The size, the color, the weight, and the final shape of the coin. One famous example is a 1989 dime struck on a copper penny planchet. Because the penny planchet is larger and copper-colored, the resulting coin looked completely wrong for a dime. Roosevelt's portrait was incomplete. Parts of the design were cut off by the edges, and the color was a deep reddish tone instead of silver. That coin sold for $55,250, shocking even seasoned collectors. But perhaps the most astonishing example was a 1989 dime struck on a foreign planchet, slightly smaller and made of a darker metal. The weight did not match any U.S. coin, the edges appeared weaker, and parts of Roosevelt's face were missing entirely. This coin, graded mint state and considered one of a kind, sold for $138,760, setting the record for the most valuable 1989 dime ever sold. Another type of error that appears in 1989, and one easily recognizable even by beginners, is the missing clad layer error. Modern dimes are made from a copper core coated with cupronickel. When one of those outer layers fails to bond, the surface becomes copper-colored instead of silver. A 1989 dime missing the clad layer on one side sold for $5,300, while another one missing both layers, completely copper on both sides, reached $9,950. These errors look dramatically different from normal dimes and are highly collectible. Another fascinating error is the broad strike, which happens when the retaining collar that forms the rim doesn't hold the coin properly. The dime spreads outward, becoming larger and flatter than normal, with a smooth rim instead of the typical reeded edge. A high-grade broad strike dime from 1989 sold for $1,450, and another with a slightly off-center broad strike reached $2,350. Errors caused by damaged dies were also common in 1989. These include die cracks, die breaks, and cuds. A cud occurs when part of the die breaks away completely, leaving a raised blob of metal on the coin. A dime with a large cud near the rim sold for $1,300, while one with a dramatic die crack through the portrait reached $1,950. These errors are smaller but still beloved by collectors who enjoy studying the life cycle of the dies used in coin production. Another category of error from 1989 is the struck-through error, caused when something becomes lodged between the die and the planchet at the moment of striking. It might be mint grease, a metal shaving, a fiber, or even a small piece of debris from the machinery. One dime struck through heavy grease, so much so that Roosevelt's face was nearly unrecognizable, sold for $1,050, while another struck through a small metal fragment reached $1,800. Some dimes from 1989 also show partial collar strikes, where the rim is only partially formed. Part of the edge may look normal while another section is flattened or misaligned. A high-grade 1989 partial collar error sold for $1,100, making clear that even subtle minting mistakes have dedicated collectors. What makes the 1989 dime especially fascinating is that it is not a particularly old coin. Many of the valuable errors from that year may still be out there, still circulating, still slipping unnoticed into change, still waiting in drawers or jars for someone to finally look at them closely. People simply don't check dimes the way collectors do. That means a valuable error might be right in front of someone who never realizes what they're holding. If you ever find a 1989 dime that looks strange, if the color seems off, if the design looks misaligned or doubled, if part of Roosevelt's face seems missing, or if the coin looks too large or too small, take a closer look. You might be holding something extremely valuable. But there is one important rule. Never clean a rare coin. Cleaning destroys the original mint luster and reduces the coin's value significantly. The best thing to do is place the coin in a protective holder and consider sending it to a grading service such as PCGS or NGC. A certified error coin almost always sells for more because collectors trust the authentication. The Roosevelt Dime of 1989 proves that even in a modern minting era, spectacular errors are still possible. And when they happen, they can transform a tiny 10-cent coin into a remarkable collectible worth tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. The most dramatic examples, especially wrong planchet strikes and extreme double or off-center strikes, have reached between $55,250 and $138,760, making them among the most exciting modern dime discoveries. So the next time you hold a dime from 1989, don't ignore it. Turn it under the light. Check the rim, the design, the surface texture, and the weight. Because you might not be holding just another coin. You might be holding a rare error that has traveled through hands for more than 3 decades, waiting for someone to finally notice its true value.